All right, everybody. Welcome to our first episode of the Fifth Dimension live video podcast. I'm your co host, Matthew J. Haas. And of course, with me, my co host, Mr. Dave Schumacher. We're doing our first episode tonight, and I want to welcome everybody to the show. Dave, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you, Matt? Welcome to the
Um,
show.
yeah, I'm doing pretty good.
Good.
Um, Going to make sure that everything is good on our end. But
Okay.
just want to tell everybody once again in the beginning of the show that we do have a chat room. And if you click on our YouTube channel and you watch our live video feed on YouTube, once again, YouTube is absolutely free. There's a chat room next to the live video feed. All you need is a Gmail account. They coincide with one another. So as long as you have a Gmail account, you can get on YouTube anytime. You just go in that little chat box and you can chat with us during the live show. And I'm gonna make sure I have myself on mute. This way we don't get bad reverb. Otherwise, people will not like our show.
Well, hopefully some people will join in and ask questions and interact. That'd be great.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. All right, so hopefully they'll interact and let us know how the sound quality and video quality is. And like I said, if anybody would like to ask questions during the show, join the chat room. We'll be glad to answer any questions as we go. Um, I guess I want to, for those who are new to our show, I run a group called Island Paranormal Society on Long Island, New York, and Dave also runs a team out in Illinois. Currently, his group is called Paranormal Research Group, they originated from Wisconsin area, and they moved to PA and then back to Illinois for job reasons. But we decided to do a podcast together, and I've been. Some people may be familiar with my voice from doing paranormal talk radio for many years, and I've also been doing radio for quite a few years before that. I'm a lecturer all across the tri-state area and the East Coast. I've been to many widely recognized paranormal conferences, and I've done a lot of prominent conferences and events and stuff like that within the paranormal. So, Dave, you want to give a little background about yourself?
Sure. I've been interested in it seriously since probably the 80s or so, and then up through college and grad school, stuck with it. Took a little more scientific approach, research approach, to more or less understand why people are having those type of experiences. I'm with the Paranormal Research Group currently. I also did some work with the Trans Anomalies Research Team, which is a group of independent researchers throughout the world, Spain, Canada, to the U.S. Did some work with them. That's part of actually Michael Persinger's lab was part of that group as well. So that was really cool to be able to do some research with him. And right now, mainly just focusing on doing research and looking more into survival related phenomena, life after death experiences, near death experiences, of course, ghosts and hauntings, reincarnation, all that stuff. So, trying to take a little broader view of things. And Jen, my wife, and I run the paranormal research group, as Matt said, out of Illinois.
Great.
And I met Matt on his show, Paranormal Talk Radio. That had to be getting up into what, 7, 6, maybe 5, 6 years ago now.
Yeah, yeah,
Been a while.
yeah. Definitely has. Time flies when you have fun.
Yep.
Yeah,
Or you just
time
get old
goes.
and it goes fast
Yeah,
anyway.
yeah, right. So, yeah, we were looking for a gentleman or a person that has really good background and knowledge in near-death experiences. I have a little interest in that myself, because I find the subject fascinating, and I think that could be a road where we may scientifically prove, life after death as we pass on, as far as studying, the human anatomy and the brain and, all that good stuff. But we contacted Dave because he has some great background in that, and offered him a chance to be a guest on Paranormal Talk Radio at the time, and said yes, and we've been friends and colleagues ever since. And we didn't just have him on as a guest on our show. We've become really good friends over the years, and We've worked on several projects together, a couple of investigations here and there, and been going ever since. And I just asked him, I'd love to do a video podcast, something different from doing radio. I mean, it's still in the podcast realm, if you will, but I thought he'd be great to have as a co-host for this particular project, and
Well, thanks,
so
Matt. And if anybody just doesn't like looking at us for an hour, that's Matt's fault. So you can just blame him for that one.
well, I thought video would be doing more fun than radio. Radio tends to get
It can be.
tedious after a while.
It can be a lot more fun.
But you can actually see our facial expressions, and when we joke around or get mad at something, you can actually see what's going on. So I think to put a face next to the conversation, I think would be kind of cool.
Well, yeah, it's going to be fun. So let's see what kind of trouble we can get into.
Yeah. But speaking of trouble, our topic for tonight's show, if anybody's interested in participating in our topic for tonight, again, chat room, if you want to ask us questions about the subject, feel free. Um, so I thought of a really good topic, which is what are some of the important things and key elements to presenting what a person could think is paranormal evidence and how they present it to the public. I know Dave and I kind of hit on this a little bit on our world premiere that we did, which I think is still listed under our video list there on YouTube. You could go back and listen to it. I'm not featured on it because I screwed up with the video, but you can see Dave talk. You can hear me speaking, but
Yeah,
we
thanks
talked
for
about
that. Appreciate that.
that. We talked about that, a little bit. And I thought that would be a great topic because I think there are so many key elements that people overlook when they present something to the public eye. Um, first of all, one of the first things you should have make sure that you have done is make sure you have permission from any location that you're presenting. You want to be careful that you're not presenting any information that shouldn't be in the public eye. I always say that investigations that we do are always discreet and confidential, with obviously with it, not without permission or consent from the actual owner of the property. Somebody might say, oh yeah, you can go ahead and put that on Facebook or YouTube. I thought that would be pretty cool, but make sure you get the appropriate permission from the right people and authority, because one person's opinion about that may be different from the actual owner, and that could go really bad in so many ways. And you don't want a bad reputation or anything to reflect on you. So, you know, we did
Yeah,
talk about that.
that's something that Jen started doing even way before I joined her group. Is getting people to sign basically permission and waivers and or release forms if there was a certain thing we could talk about or not, or information that could be released. It was up to them, and that was a good move. I mean, that was smart on her part in order to figure out what people would allow us to say or not say. And a lot of times they're okay with it, and other times they didn't want anybody to know anything about it. So getting permission and having some sort of formal agreement is always beneficial.
Yes, I totally agree. I would definitely recommend writing over verbal, because I mean, even though you think you have verbal permission and it might sound great between the both parties, but it may be a different tune. There could be some disagreements in the future, or the relationship might get rocky later on, and it's definitely always a great thing to have in writing.
Yep, definitely agree.
Yeah. Um, some of the other key elements, I think, as far as presenting things to the public, also is one of my pet peeves. And again, we talked about this a little bit when we introduced our show, is how it's presented. It's critical because we all know, those who are serious about paranormal research, that it's not proven by science yet. It's not scientifically proven. Right now it's a serious hobby or a field of study to some people. Um, we're not being paid for this, unfortunately. We don't make any money doing this, and I think in order to be taken more seriously by the scientific community, I think it's really important how you present your evidence to the public because if you're throwing a piece of evidence out there, let's just say, for example, you have a really good EVP, right? For those who don't know what EVP is, electronic voice phenomena, it's things that we don't hear at the time of the recording during a paranormal investigation. We're trying to communicate with a spirit or a ghost, and we have a audio recording device going at the time of what you're doing. And when you ask questions, you don't hear the responses during the live recording, but during playback through the playback of the device you're using, you only hear responses in return. There's many theories with that. They're coming in different frequency ranges, and we don't know exactly the origin of these frequencies per se. That's really hard to pinpoint right now. We don't have the scientific explanation for where they could be coming from. There's a lot of debate about that. But anyway, long story short, say you got a really good EVP and you're claiming it's a Class A EVP and you're titling the EVP, you're wording what you think it's saying. Like you're already offering power suggestion of what you think it is versus, what somebody else might think it is. And you're tainting what you want that person to hear because you're giving that suggestion already. So I think there are different ways that you can try to avoid um, that power suggestion thing or pareidolia, which gets thrown around like there's no tomorrow. Um, but I think there are many controls that you could put in place for even presenting EVP to the public. What are your thoughts on that, Dave?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think one of the main things to stop doing is just cutting out the word or a couple words you think you hear and putting that up, that wave or MP3 or however you put it up. You need some time before and after that. You have to hear the context of the question, what was asked, what type of response you're looking for. And you definitely don't want to tell people what you think it says. It's a lot better just to put it up as we have an audio clip, something we recorded. We'd like to know what you think it says and give them a little bit before, a little bit after, and get people to listen to it and tell you what they hear. Because I can guarantee you, and Jen and I give talks all over, and one of the
Yeah.
things we've done is we have somebody listen. We have a group of people listen to an EVP without telling them what we think it says, and sometimes not. They hear what we hear, but if
Hmm.
you tell them what you think you hear, everybody hears it.
Hmm.
And that's one of the biggest things I see is a lot of times you'll see EVP files posted on a website or on Facebook or on a TV show, and they put the words under it that they think they hear. So right away, you're going to hear that.
Right.
So one of the easiest things you can do to really improve what you're doing is don't do that. Don't do
Yeah.
that. And then also provide a little context around it. It's also good to list the date and the time the session was, who was in the room, and also note any sounds that anybody makes. If somebody clears their throat or their stomach grumbles a little bit or there's a car outside, you definitely want to mark that and say something because that can be mistaken for something unexplainable a little bit later on when you're not there anymore and you're listening to it. We used to also run at least two different recorders, one digital and one analog, a high quality analog recorder, and then the digital recorders. And we found that a lot of the stuff we thought was unexplainable, when you went back and listened to high quality analog, it was actually a very explainable
Hmm.
uh, noise. So just a couple quick things people could do to start improving upon that type of data that's being presented as potentially related to any type of paranormal activity at a location.
Yeah. Would you also recommend blocking out radio signals because there's a lot of skeptics or people that aren't believing in the potential of EVP that we get on
Yeah.
on,
I mean,
almost on
if you can, it's getting harder and harder to do, of course, with all the
right.
different everything's wireless. There's so
I
much
know.
potential for interference. It's
Yeah.
hard unless you get a Faraday cage and put it in there and do it
Hmm.
that way. We've also tried running radio frequency counters at the same time that we're doing EVPs. And again, running multiple recorders. And then, yeah, if you can shield it somehow or put it in a Faraday cage,
Right.
that's one possibility. But the problem is we don't know, nobody knows for sure if that's going to block out what you're trying to capture
Sure, sure.
or not. I mean, I know some people have played around with it. The results have been inconclusive at best. Some people have even done recorders without microphones, just a simple
Oh,
wire or nothing
right.
attached at all, or disabling the internal mechanism because they think whatever is being recorded is being influenced on the actual electronics or the recording heads of the old school tape recorders. If you know you're old enough to remember those, so there's been a whole bunch of different things tried, but the problem is nobody's really come up with anything conclusive yet as far as where they come from and what's generating them. There's a lot of ideas out there, and there's a lot of time for experimentation.
Yeah.
The thing to remember is just if you're going to do stuff, give a bigger picture than a little snippet, and make sure you explain what you did, what equipment you used, the situation, the context, and that'll give people a much better idea of what happened. And you'll be able to get some better information and feedback from people that review your information.
Yeah. Another control, not that it's so much a control variable that you could put in place when you're doing EVP, but one really good method would be, in my opinion, try to listen in real time as much as possible. And if there's some kind of software you can run where you can like pinpoint where the frequencies are coming from, like if you can kind of narrow down where those frequencies are coming from in a way, I don't know, like I don't even think anybody's really come up with anything like that where we can actually get the origin of, where all these signals are coming from to make sure we can, you know uh weed them out per se. But if you can listen in real time and watch, every little thing on your screen or something, we try to listen in real time as much as possible. We try to, see where the human, harmonics are coming from and make comparisons visually. I had a colleague that said if you can do EVP with the most visuals involved is like the much better way to go. But I haven't really tightened a really good method for that yet, but we're working on that. And if we do come up with some kind of really great way of doing EVP with that involved, I think that would be a really interesting road to go down.
Yeah, definitely. And that equipment and that technology is available. It's not cheap, especially if you're looking at low level signals and you're trying to weed out everything that could be potentially in the area. I mean,
Yeah.
there's certain ways to a limit that you could potentially do that, but it gets really hard. And I know, Bill out in Pennsylvania, he was looking at
Bill
recording,
Highland. Yeah.
yeah, Bill Highland, radio frequency, electromagnetic fields. He was trying to take a look, and I think he played around with the no microphone or the different types of
Yeah, he did that
microphones.
too. Yep.
Yeah, and he was playing around with that as well. And I haven't heard any updates on where he's at with that. But people have been looking at this for a while. But I'll go back to the one when I talked about having the two recorders and voice marking things and having a good analog recorder and identifying things we used to think may have had some sort of unexplained origin. I got to tell you, Matt, we probably reduced the number of EVPs that we got by 80 to 90%. We didn't get
Wow.
rid of all of them, but we
Right.
reduced a whole ton of false positives, which to me was kind of eye opening. It's like, okay, we reduced it that much, but when you still got one, to me, it meant a little bit more, and it seemed a little more impressive when you're trying to filter out all those other potential explainable sounds that you just didn't know that they were explainable sounds. Because obviously, when you use digital recorders, there's a whole lot of there can be compression, and then you got the audio digital, analog digital conversions, and there's all kinds of things that can come up with that, and the compression and the files.
Hmm.
So when we started looking at just plain old high quality analog recorders, boy, it made a big difference. So there's little steps you can take to really improve your methodology quite a bit. But yeah, if you can find an economical way to monitor every little frequency radio wave that's out there, that would help too. It's
Hmm.
just there's so much. It gets to be a complicated setup, and it's going
Yeah.
to take a lot of time to get through all that.
Yeah, yeah, it could be a headache, it could be complicated, and like you said, it could be expensive with some of the equipment that's out there that is available. But if it's worth it, I mean, maybe, sometime in the future, somebody will come out with a more portable version of what's out there, because technology is improving and growing, rapidly, and hopefully
Yep.
we'll be able to come up with something that is more affordable for everybody. And if we could go in that kind of direction, I think would be great for EVP because, in my opinion, EVP is one of those things that I think really stands out, at least for me, as far as paranormal evidence. And there's a lot of really, really great EVPs that you can't just throw out, because of pareidolia, because of power suggestion. There's a lot of great EVPs that are out there that you just can't explain and find the origin of what, where they came from. And, depending on, the relevance of the questioning, what was involved during the questioning, the location, the background. And if you throw all of it together and get a really good EVP that can match many things with that involved, that to me
Yep.
is like, what do you do with that? It's like,
Yeah, and I think you're right when you talk about trying to figure out where that's coming from and all the frequencies, but then I think you mentioned briefly video recording, that's important as well because there's a
yeah.
lot of times where you'll have a good EVP, or at least you think it is, and all of somebody has to say to destroy your entire argument is, "I wasn't there, so I don't know if somebody said something or somebody moved or, there's somebody else in that location or there was a noise outside. I wasn't there, so I don't know."
Hmm.
That's a legitimate
It's
question
legitimate,
if you
but
don't have
it's an
everything
annoying
documented, if you don't have the video, the audio, and you've really kind of covered your bases and explained the entire setup in detail. So it's a legitimate concern, but there's ways you can collect that type of stuff to make it a little easier to defend if you think you get something good, because there's nothing more frustrating than getting something that's really good and all somebody has to say is I wasn't there and you don't have anything to show me or tell me that who was there and what happened. So
right.
that's why that 2-second clip is it's just not going to
Not
fly.
enough. No, not for those people. And the other thing you can do too, Dave, is you can ask them, well, when I present this to that kind of person that's going to ask that type of question, what are some things that what would they do to
Mhm.
have something more presentable for them, how could they improve that with that kind of person that would review that piece of
Yep.
evidence? So I would turn around and say, well, what could I do to improve it? You tell me, offer me some solutions where I could do better as a researcher and an investigator, so that when I present something that, oh, okay, I never thought of that. And to me, that's really good constructive criticism right there.
Right.
And taking good constructive criticism well and going with that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And one of the problems is there is no standard methodology in the field that
Mhm,
everybody can agree to say, if you do it this way, there's a pretty good chance if you get something, it'll at least be worth looking into. And the field just hasn't gotten there. I mean, there's a lot of books, there's a lot of ideas, a lot of people have their way of doing things, but there's just no standard repeatable methodology. And, we got to accept that that's a limitation.
mhm,
But if we can sit down and people can provide constructive criticism and not just bash on certain pieces of information or data and how you did things, but if we could come up with an agreement of how to approach it in a methodology, that would go a long way. Now, parapsychologists, professional academic parapsychologists, when they were studying all different types of ESP and psi, skeptics were pretty hard on them, but they sat down. Actually, the academic skeptics and the parapsychologists sat down and worked out an acceptable methodology. And they did get results and it meant more. So
mhm,
there are ways to work together. And it's not, the enemy, and we're not the enemy. Skeptics aren't the enemy, but we need to sit down and have constructive discussions on how to make the field better.
mhm. But then, I mean, and then you have, unfortunately, a lot of egos and different personalities in the paranormal community, and you're gonna have certain people and individuals, and there are some out there. You can't argue that there isn't, but there are some people out there who will just totally stand by their evidence, and they really think because they're a firm believer, 100% believer in the paranormal, that if they don't have these other understanding of what we just talked about, and they've never gone down a scientific road to,
Right.
rule everything possibly out. But you have people who just stand there and don't want to like think outside the box, like it's outside of their comfort zone, and but they'll argue with you until you're blue in the face, and it don't matter how many which ways you try to come up with, a scientific explanation, or ways that you can improve what that person is presenting. And like I've had like I try to stay away from those conversations because they don't really go anywhere. But you know, I like those people give me a headache. You know?
Yeah, it's sometimes it's better just to agree to disagree and move on.
Right,
But,
right.
and then you bring up an important point, talking about what you're trying to accomplish and what your goals are and what you believe, and if you believe it's a good piece of evidence. Because evidence, I mean, data is just data. It's a
Hmm.
number, it's a point of information, it's something you collect, it's got some, validity, it's got some reliability if you do it right, but it really is nothing but data. And it only becomes evidence when you pose a question or you're looking to pursue a line of thought or a hypothesis. People in the
Yeah.
scientific community would call it a hypothesis. So then you're
Hmm.
collecting data that would provide evidence for what you're thinking. So it's important to realize that if your hypothesis coming saying that ghosts exist, I'm going to prove it with evidence of EVP, you're approaching it from that standpoint. And then that might be a little different than the way somebody else approaches it, which their evidence is, I think I'm collecting data to prove it's just normal causes. We can explain it. There's radio signals. So it gets that nuance to where you have to basically describe what you're trying to collect to prove what and how you're going to do it and if it's valid or not.
Yeah.
So data is just data, but evidence, that's when you come up with something and say, hey, I want to prove that there's paranormal activity at this place. And the way I'm going to do is collect data and EVPs to show you that I have something that proves that.
Yeah.
So there's a little, I mean, it seems like a nuance, but there's a big difference between data and evidence.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up too, because as everybody knows me, that word evidence is really a strong word. And, people throw that word evidence around like, everything is evidence, and that everything they have, this is a good piece of evidence. This is evidence. I get where you're going with that, but evidence to me is proof that you have something. Like in my opinion, like you're proving, what you have. And no offense to a lot of people, but when they present stuff to the public, I'm sorry, that's not enough evidence or documentation to me to state that you have something of evidence. Now, I use that term evidence loosely, and if you ever notice when I present my work to the public, I never say this is evidence. I try to stay away from the word evidence completely, and I try to use words like findings, this is my results, this is my research, this is my data that I've been going over. This is our findings, and I try to let people be their own judge. And I'm okay with people disagreeing or agreeing with me. I welcome constructive criticism, whether people agree with that or not. But I really do. If people were to really sit down and have an intelligent conversation with me, without insulting me, or without being immature, or having the complex that you're always right and I'm always wrong. If I can have a really good conversation piece in that sense, then you know um yeah, try to, I think, in my opinion, many people should try to stay away from using the word evidence.
Yeah, I mean, evidence is data that's relevant to what you're trying to prove. It supports your hypothesis. And the
Right.
thing everybody needs to remember is that, if you're going through the scientific method, you come up with a hypothesis, there's called a null hypothesis, which means you just accept the null version. There isn't anything to it. It doesn't support what you're trying to prove. Then there's that alternate hypothesis that the data does support it. So your data can support evidence for and evidence against. So
Hmm.
there's negative and positive evidence. So a lot of times people just will present what they think is positive evidence. but it could also go the other way. And we need to not be afraid to present the negative evidence as well. So I think
Mhm.
a lot of times you can just gain a whole lot more credibility just based on how you're approaching it, as far as excuse me, as far as what you're saying and what the data supports. So, it's always good if you go through the scientific method, like a lot of people say they do. If you're really going to do that, you got to remember your data can be evidence for or against depending on how it comes out.
Right.
And you may get one good hit on a piece of equipment, but the rest of the night you might not get anything. But that's
Yeah.
just as important.
Mhm.
So I don't know. I think I've had some success talking with, certain people, certain groups, when you kind of frame it that way. It's, well, this is the data.
Mhm.
It's evidence for this, but yeah, we totally say it's not evidence for something else? No, you can't.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just opening that up kind of and acknowledging that sometimes gives you a little bit more leeway to
Right. Right.
talk and learn from people.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to say like we're like to dismiss just because I feel in my and it's only my opinion where I think evidence is a strong word to use, but I'm not saying that we should dismiss what you think could be, plausible evidence. I'm not doing that at all, but I'm just saying I think we should, have a more careful approach on how you're presenting your findings and your results and your data to the public because does it have a strong further look into it? Sure, absolutely, 100%. I'm not saying that we should just stop just because I don't think that that's evidence in my opinion. Again, that's just my opinion. So I just think, like it's terminology. I think the way people throw terminology out in the paranormal community is like ass backwards. And I'm kind of glad you brought up the scientific method because I mean, there's a little portion of the field that understands the scientific method, but then I think there's another part of the field that's just, you know, that I think doesn't quite understand the scientific method. But Dave, without getting too heavy into it, what are some ways, in your opinion, how we could pertain the scientific method into a paranormal investigation, and how can people have a simple understanding of the scientific method, how it could work in an
It,
investigation?
yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, from the very simplest thing, you're trying to either test a claim
Hmm.
or a hypothesis. So you come in and, I mean, this is a pretty simple one. Let's say, because working with somebody else right now, analyzing some random number generator data. Their hypothesis is, and this is part of the scientific method, their hypothesis is that there's deviations from randomness. So it becomes non-random data when it occurs within a certain period of time of either a subjective paranormal experiences or something objective that can be recorded or quantified. So equipment or video or something interesting and unexplainable that can be recorded. So the hypothesis is there is a correlation. So you're testing that. So you go and collect the data and you analyze it appropriately and see if it matches what you thought. If it does, okay, there's a correlation. If it doesn't, there isn't. So that's it's that simple. It's basically coming up with a question, a hypothesis, question, or even as simply as trying to debunk or to explore a claim somebody made. So you want to come up with something you can test and collect data, analyze the data, see what it tells you, and then come to a conclusion. But it doesn't stop there. Part of that is also communicating that data, or if you want to say it's evidence for something, you need to get that out in front of people so they can look at it and they can also critique it. That's a really important part of the scientific method is
Yeah.
people looking at and critiquing your information and data. It might be painful at times, but it has to be done. So the simple approach, which I mean, our group even used this back when we were doing private residences and business investigations. We'd put a report together,
Hmm.
and it would have the standard report like you would see in a scientific publication, an introduction. Here's what's going on. Here's a little bit of the review of the history of the location or what people have reported. Then we also would talk about maybe what other people have done and what they've found. So you kind of do a literature review. But then you have materials and methods. You explain in detail, in enough detail that anybody could repeat what you did. So they could go buy the equipment or go to the location and repeat what you did. That's the materials and methods. And then you get into the results. Here's what we found. And then when you get to the discussion, you discuss it. Why do you think this is so? Here's what you found. How does it match up against what other people have found? How does it match up to the other literature in the field? And what does it mean? And what
Mhm.
might be the next steps to go forward? And then always have references, any type of research or references that you did, you want to list those as well. So it's really not that complicated. And it doesn't have to be a 30-page, master's thesis. It just has to follow a certain set of steps, and it needs to be communicated with people in order to get it out there and be critiqued. So it's pretty simple.
Yeah. I think part of the problem, Dave, with the scientific method and, having science involved in paranormal investigation, and I know this could be a touchy subject when I bring this up, and I don't mean it to res reflect in an ill manner or, disrespectful way whatsoever. I don't want anybody to take me wrong, but I think a lot of the paranormal community taints paranormal investigations too much with personal belief and experiences. Not that I'm saying personal experiences are a bad thing. There are ways that you could test personal experiences versus, using the scientific method and, doing different things in that way with personal experiences. You can do that. You can do so many things with that too. But I think a lot of people are using personal belief uh, in their paranormal investigations, and I mean, let's face it, there's a lot of lazy people out there, and they don't want to do this kind of hard work that's involved. They may think it's a little too complicated for them because they've always pertained to their belief, and if they think they have enough evidence that's going to stand behind or support their belief system even stronger without any of that stuff, um, I think some of that is a big problem. In order for us to push the scientific um, evidence out there, and also the reason I bring this up is another strong word that is constantly used is the word haunting. And people use the word haunting around. They catch an EVP, and automatically they think a location's haunted because they catch one good EVP. And in my opinion, a location's not haunted just because of one EVP. There's got to be several occurrences and collection of data and research over the years before you can label a location to be haunted at all. I don't know. Does what I say make a little sense, Dave? Or
Yeah, and the most you can really say is that it might exhibit characteristics of what other people have reported in haunted locations. There's a lot of differences, and you're right though. One EVP is not going to prove anything, and even
yeah,
one night going to one location doesn't prove anything. And that's one of the reasons we stopped doing private home investigations, just for the reason that you people didn't want you to keep coming back, and you really needed to in order to understand what might be happening there.
yeah, yeah,
And you go in for one night for 2 hours, okay. So something
yeah.
may happen or something may not happen.
Right.
And it's just a culmination of repeated investigation. I mean, some of the original investigation of haunted locations or apparitional experiences by members of the Society of Psychical Research and the American Society of Psychical Research, these were 30, 40, 50-page documents of them spending days, if not weeks, at locations documenting things. And that's one of the things I think people are really missing out these days during investigations, is just simply documenting anything and everything at the location.
Yeah.
It isn't just running in and running around with a lot of, really cool looking EMF meters with lights on them. It's sitting down and asking people questions about what they experienced, who was there, what were the circumstances. And then you talked about belief, Matt. You got to ask people, what do you believe? Because one of the
Mhm.
things that they have shown for sure in the parapsychological and the psychological literature is if you believe in the paranormal, you will have more experiences. You will. If you send them into a dark, old, nasty prison, something scary at night, like East State Pen or Mansfield Reformatory, you look at people who have a high belief in the paranormal, they're going to have more experiences. They just are. So you somehow have to tease that out of it. How do you tease out the belief, which leads to experiences? And then there's that whole phenomena that the more experiences you have, the more belief you might have. So then it just kind of is a self-feeding mechanism. But there's actually standard question sets to assess levels of belief in paranormal, ghost and haunt phenomena, and then you can start teasing apart. Okay, did these people who had more belief, did they have more experiences? The ones that get interesting are the ones that have absolutely no belief, but they still have experiences, especially ones that match up with other changes in the environment or match up in locations where other people had experiences that these people didn't know. So there's ways you can start teasing this stuff apart, and it's just not being done.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I brought it up because I don't see that being done at all, and, I like
It
they
has
just
been.
mentioned.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
articles from the 70s that people have gone. There's certain ways that they did investigations and collected data that
Mhm.
need to be repeated, and it's a great way to collect stuff. It's just not being done.
Yeah.
And I think a
With
big part of that problem is people just aren't aware of that literature out there.
Yeah, yeah, maybe we should start pushing that out there a lot more, and I know you and Jen have been, pushing that kinda stuff really hard, and, I'm just not sure, like, how many people are really paying attention to what's available already.
Yeah.
Um, they're too busy with their paranormal conferences and their good catch bro, kind of stuff. And, to them that's like satisfying enough. But, you kind of, I don't mean to be negative, but there's a lot of hypocrites out there that, want to say they want to prove this, thing, and they want this to be mainstream science. They want it to be, taken seriously by the scientific community. And I think, we need to be more serious and take literature more serious. And you know we can't like dismiss the things that are from the 70s and the 60s. And there's a lot of good data and research that's been done already that we can base our work off of, because all the stuff that we're doing currently. And when I was doing Paranormal Talk Radio, I'm actually going to quote Tim Vickers. I kind of agree with what he said during our show, which is we're kind of getting the same results over and over and over, and we're not really proving anything from the scientific method, or we're not proving it scientifically yet with all of our methods and all of our technology, and we're still getting the same results over and over. So I think we should go back to basics kind of root, and go back to that literature and go back to that research that where people were, you know, where they were making groundbreaking research, and build, start building off of that again. I think we kind of just like, I don't know, we kind of
Yeah.
just slipped up somewhere. And I don't know, I feel
Well, I
like we're
think a
all
lot of
looking
it
for
is
that.
people. There's a couple things I think, and this is just my personal opinion, is what they see on TV, they think that's the way it is. And
Mm,
whatever cool little flashy gadget is out there, they're going to use it without understanding really how it works. Or it these things aren't, we don't have ghost detectors. I mean, we got to be honest, we don't really know what a ghost is. We
yeah,
don't.
yeah.
So
If
to
we don't
get
understand
somebody
that, then how are we
yeah.
gonna have stuff to say it's
So when
evidence?
you get somebody on that gets a piece of equipment and says, "Well, I've been told that when this red light comes on, it means a ghost is here." And if I'm going into a location and I want to prove there's ghosts and I have a bias against that, well, that's what they're doing. I mean, it's they're
Yeah,
confirming their belief, which, I'm not going to criticize anybody or what they do. That's fine. But don't try to present it as scientific proof.
yeah,
That's where I think the disconnect really comes in. And there's a big difference between going out and collecting something to kind of confirm your belief and your bias, as opposed to actually doing a real scientific analysis and study and coming up with some information data that might lead to some evidence.
yeah. Before we get further into, like, I can't believe it's we're already like have 15 minutes left of the show, but um I really want to take the time to do a couple things here, Dave, before we get further into the conversation.
Sure.
First, I want to give a shout out to my one of my great mentors in the paranormal community, Mr. Chip Reichenthal. I was on his radio show, Kindness Beyond the Veil, a few weeks back. He was kind of helped promote the Fifth Dimension a little bit on his show. So I just want to give a shout out to Chip and thank him again publicly for having me as his guest on his show. It was a lot of fun, and hope to do it again sometime. And also hope to have him on our show as a guest sometime in the future, which I asked him if he wouldn't mind that. But
Cool.
so
Good.
I just
That's
want to give a
awesome.
yeah, give a shout out to Chip. And we can't listen to ourselves live during the show. It's hard. I can watch us on video live during the show as I am right now on YouTube, but we can't hear ourselves because otherwise it would just sound terribly to our listeners. So again, as always, I like to give a moment to please leave us good or bad feedback. We'll take it good or bad. You can leave comments on our YouTube page or go on Facebook. We do have a Facebook page. You can just look up the Fifth Dimension Live Video Podcast on Facebook, and you can also leave comments on our YouTube channel. If you have a Gmail account, it's free. Go on there and leave a comment under our video. Let us know what you think of our show, and if there are any topics, or you can give some feedback on the topic that we were talking about. If you like, you know, it's there. So without that, we don't know how we're doing. So please take the time to do that. It'd be really great. And one more other thing, if our listeners and people who like the show, or even our colleagues and our friends, if they could spread the word about the Fifth Dimension Live Video Podcast, if they like it, please spread the word out on social media. That'd be great. If you could help push the show for us, I couldn't thank you any other way. If you could do that, that'd be awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nope.
So
Good. Good. Glad you mentioned that.
yeah, so I mean, we're gonna probably have really low numbers in the beginning of pushing the show. We've only had this is our technically our very first episode, so it's gonna take a little while to build our numbers and stuff. But in order to do that, we have to kind of promote ourselves, and promoting yourself is a lot of hard work, as I know it's taken me quite a number of years to get get that reputation and build that up again. So we can't do it without a little help. So if we could have a little help, that'd be great. So,
Yep. Anything
um,
we get is appreciated.
yeah, definitely. So, all right, yeah. Our topic might be a little heavy for some. We really want to push. We want to try to not only are we doing this show because we like doing it and we love talking about these subjects, but if we could really help improve the paranormal community in any way that we can through our show, I think that's a bonus. And I've always been that way. I'm not competitive in any nature whatsoever, and I've always been about networking and true paranormal unity, not the unity that many people think they're doing, but the actual unity where we're pushing the entire field to a better direction. And I think if our show can have a hand in that in itself is great. So those are the type of topics we'll be talking about on the Fifth Dimension, but not just ghosts and spirits and hauntings. That's fun, sure, but we're going to talk about other stuff like UFOs and aliens and mysteries, and maybe a little history, a little science, technology. We're going to talk about other stuff. I think the word paranormal is a lot broader than just ghosts and spirits. So we're going to get into other stuff like parapsychology, like Dave's really into, all that heavy stuff like PSI and near-death experiences. So we're going to talk about that stuff too. So, so hang on for the ride. It's going to be a great adventure on the Fifth Dimension Live Video Podcast. Hey, I sounded really good. That sounded like a real infomercial.
Yeah, it was. It was a good one. You accepting donations now?
I
You
got to
should
put
have
a donation button on
aliens.
our.
You should have just recorded me watching Ancient Aliens the other day. I don't know
I
how that
love
show
that.
suckers me in, but it
I
does.
let me tell you something about
Giorgio,
that.
he's the man. Oh my god. The only
That guy
thing that's
needs to,
alien is his hair.
he's got to find a comb.
That's part of his shtick.
I I bet you he keeps hairspray a lot in business.
The only thing that explains his hair, man, is aliens. That's the only thing I
Yeah,
can come up with.
or he's
But
sticking
yeah,
his
it'll be good. We're going to
finger
touch
in a.
on a bunch of different topics that I'm interested in as well. I focus mainly on ghosts and hauntings, survival related in the parapsychology world. But I do try to keep up on some of the other stuff. I do like to read about cryptozoological things. I do like to read about UFOs. I'm not any expert in any means at any of it, but it's just kind of interesting, and hopefully we can get some different perspectives as we progress with the show and get some other people on as well.
Yeah, sure. Um, so where our topic has been the key elements and importances of presenting what people think is really good paranormal evidence to the public. Dave and I have really touched on some really heavy issues, I think, that are, you know, can definitely use a lot of improvement in a lot of areas.
Yeah,
Um,
there's two we haven't attacked yet.
which ones?
One is controls,
Okay.
appropriate controls. And one
Mm,
of the things I would love to see, and I've started playing around with this a little bit, is running all your equipment and doing what you do in locations that don't have any reports of paranormal activity and see what you get to try to
mhm,
develop a negative baseline. I always thought that would be
right.
interesting. And that's one. I mean, you can also have controls within a location. So if you have a location in one room, people have reported a lot of stuff, run stuff there and do what you do there. And if you have another part of the house where nothing's been reported, you should do the same things there. So you can
Mhm,
kind of see the difference between the two spots. So that's the one thing. The second one is this idea that when you're out in the field doing, field work or field investigations, that anything you collect is meaningless because it's not a controlled environment. And I'm going to come out and say right now that's a bunch of bullshit.
mhm,
That just when people say that, they don't have a true appreciation of how to set up studies. Really, my training is in biology, and I did a
mhm,
lot of field biology in my day. So to say that if I go out in the woods and count a certain insect species and compare it against a certain plant type, that you tell me that that's not valid because
mhm,
it's not a controlled laboratory environment, that's a bunch of crap. So it can be done. You just
mhm,
have to control the variables you can, lock it down as much as you can do, and then use certain types of analysis and statistical analysis to account for that variability. The other thing is, you can study the stuff in the lab and say that all you're going to accept is studying it in the lab. Well, that's okay. But the problem is that's not a real world situation. So one could also argue you're not going to get the results. That's a fake situation. It's not real because you're in a sterile lab environment and it doesn't depict real life and what's really occurring out at these locations. So those are just two pet peeves that kind of get under my skin every once in a while. And I've heard a lot of that lately. And it's just, yeah, you can have controls in the field and you can do good field work and you can come up with good data. So we just need to remember that. And, maybe we'll have a show on that at one point. We'll just kind of
mhm.
focus on that and how you go about doing that.
Yeah, that's
Because
cool.
probably 90% of what I do, at least even in my job, is
Mhm,
it's field studies. It's all
yeah.
field work and it's all valid stuff. So you
Mhm,
can do work out in the field.
sure,
You
sure.
don't have to be
Yeah,
in a
totally.
sterile lab where you only control one thing. You just,
Yeah,
there's all kinds of different statistical analysis you can do as well to analyze your data to account for
right,
those things.
right. And I'm glad you brought up controls because, um, one of my pet peeves is, like, I've had a lot of debates on this, it could go either way, but you cannot, in my opinion, you cannot 100% control every inch of the environment that you're working in. Um, there are so many cracks and crevices that air can leak through that you can't control. Air flows in every direction there is. And there's so many other parts of the environment that you have no control over as a human being. It's just, in the nature of the environment in itself. And you cannot 100% control everything around you. And not only that, every location that you are welcome to do this kind of research in won't always allow you to do 100% control environment in the location that you're in also. So it's not like a place is going to hand over the keys and say, oh yeah, go ahead, turn my power off, do what you got. Not every place does that. A lot of places are heavily have heavy security, and they have to monitor everything that goes on during the investigation. There are artifacts involved. There's lots of money involved. There's historic documents that they have to watch over. There's so many factors in a control situation that it's almost impossible to sometimes do a really good control environment unless you had access to a laboratory, which is
Right.
also has claims of paranormal activity. And then if you do have a place that you can frequent where they do let you have all that access, then you're a very fortunate person. And I think in our paranormal world, that's just very fortunate for you to be that type of person where you can just get the keys and they can let you do what you got to do. But in a real life, realistic situation, like I'm tired of people saying, "Well, what controls did you do, for this, or what controls did you do for that?" And I'm sorry, but you can't control everything 100%.
Right. Well, and it just depends. It gets back again to describing exactly what you did and how you did it and using the right analysis. I mean, I don't know how many times, and I agreed with it when people would say it's hard to use any even data log EMF data because there's just, you can't turn the power off and you can't control what's going on. I'm like,
Hmm.
well, that's true. I mean, you can look for certain deviations and see if it correlates with something else, but there's a new methodology that's been developed by Brian Lathe, and it looks at using the background noise and doing something called a binomial distribution sampling and running your data through a binomial analysis and looking for things that correlate. So there's actually, again, getting back to it, is there's ways to analyze your data to make up for those things you can't control. There's just ways to do it. And to say that there isn't is just, it just shows that you don't have an understanding of how, sometimes field studies and statistics works.
Hmm. Yeah. So, we got 5 minutes left. So, in your closing thoughts, Dave, what's your closing thoughts for this topic at the end of the show?
Um, Closing thoughts are, the scientific method is not difficult. It's mainly asking a question or investigating a claim, coming up with a hypothesis, collecting information, and analyzing it, and getting it out for other people to see and critique. That's one of the just very simple things that I think the field needs to start doing.
Hmm.
And we can make a lot of progress that way, just sharing the information. And again, provide information how you collected it, under what the context was, provide specifics and details so other people can do it. Getting back to the discussion we had on EVP, do not put what you think it says when you post that. Let somebody listen to it and come up with that on their own, and provide a little bit of audio before and after it so they can get a flavor of the context and type of questions that were being asked.
Yeah, yeah.
And oh, one more thing. Make sure you
Sure.
start getting familiar with the parapsychology literature. And I'll throw it out there. Yes, the skeptical literature too. Read as much as you can. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Um, my closing thoughts are, um, I agree with you, Dave, 100%. I just documentation is the most important thing, and try to document as much as possible, whether it be notes, literature, or whatever data that you collect throughout the investigation. I think, like Dave said at the beginning of the show, there's no such thing as e- irrelevant data. You know, if you can collect as much data as you can through that investigation, um, by all means collect it. Don't throw everything out, make every comparison there is, but document everything. There's so many ways you can document. We all have access to video cameras, there's camcorders, there's digital cameras, there's audio recorders. Take notes on an audio recorder. I mean, you can write notes on a notebook and a get a note pen and notebook, the old fashioned way, write it down. Like Dave said, you can write a report, but you don't have to write a 10-page report. Get all your analysis together at the end of the night. Work together as a team. You got a team. Use your team. Delegate this shit, man. Like don't do it all yourself. Like have everybody participate in it. What are ways that you can do to make that part of the investigation so much better? Um, Number two, my thing is sharing the data and the tests that people are doing, especially with new equipment and technology that's out there. This is another pet peeve of mine. I'm always like, because I'm at the point in my life now where I have so much experience. I have over 20 years, investigating the paranormal, and I want to modify and build my own equipment. And I'm into electronics, I'm into devices and technology, and I want to build my own stuff. And I'm not exactly an electrician. I never had college background. I did this all on my own for 20 years. I learned everything on my own through my own experience and from learning from other people and having, the great mentors that I've had, support me and, teach me stuff and whatnot. But when I want to learn something about single piece of equipment, I'm not asking you to give up every single idea you have. I'm not competitive in any way. When I go and ask a question to somebody about sharing their tests or their data on that piece of equipment, it's because I want to learn. It's because I want to learn more about that piece of technology and how we can improve and make that piece of technology even so much better. That's all I'm looking to do. I'm not trying to get into your head and take your idea. I'm not there to steal your ideas. And I think I see that a lot. I think people are so afraid of people taking other people's ideas. Well, if it's such a great idea, first of all, you should copyright it and make sure that you have it protected in the first place, and then therefore you would never have to worry about your work being stolen by anybody. But there's a lot of people out there that just want to do it because they want to learn how to build their. Let's face it, there's a lot of equipment out there that costs freaking hundreds of dollars. They're as much as a mortgage payment, they're as much as a car payment, and maybe those people can't afford to buy that stuff online, from all these ghost hunting stores that are out there. Maybe they want to build their own stuff that doesn't cost them a mortgage payment. Maybe they want to find out how much cheaper it can be for them so that it's not expensive for them. And that's all I'm doing. And I want more people who's into building equipment to just be more sharing of it because I find it so amazing. And I think that that could be an area that could maybe someday scientifically say for sure this is a really good solid piece of data that we have that we can build off of. And why wouldn't you want to promote that?
Yeah, I think the one thing people need to remember too is you don't even need to have equipment. You don't have to have fancy equipment. You can go and just uh, collect the information and use your brain. It's the simple thing. Take notes and use your brain. Get experiences.
Yeah, so that's my little pet peeve there. So all right, so we're closing the show out now. I want to thank everybody, those who listened and watched our show. I actually think we actually had 2 viewers. That's another thing I like about this platform we're using, Dave. It actually is telling me how many viewers we have watching live, so that's a good
No, it's
statistic to have during
two
the live
more than the
show.
last time we did it, so that's good. We're up,
So,
we're up a couple 100%. Nice.
yeah, right? So, so if those 2 viewers could give us great, feedback in any way, that'd be great. If you liked our topic, so we're gonna try to broadcast our show every Sunday night at 8 p.m. if it's possible for our schedules. If not, we can always bang out something during the week. But yeah, try to keep up with our show every Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Dave, you're an hour behind, I think.
Yep. I'm Central Time.
So it would be if it's 8 p.m., it'll be 7
It's
p.m.
yep, yep.
7 p.m. Central Time. And then I think 5 p.m. Pacific. So yeah, I hope everybody enjoyed the show. I'm gonna go ahead and stop broadcasting, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks. Talk to you
Yep,
later.
take care.